back again together to do some more uncovering of our sources. As you may remember, we've been looking in our boxes and pulling out things with our readers and finding out about our different sources. Our first one was direct experience. The second was words and deeds of prophetic women and men. Our third was wisdom from the world's religions. Our fourth was Jewish and Christian teachings. That brings us to the fifth, which for a long time was our last source. But we did add a sixth later on, and we'll get to that the next time I preach. But this is the fifth source. Humanist teachings, which counsel us to heed the guidance of reason and the results of science, and warn us against the idolatries of the mind and of the spirit. Here are unpackers unpacking again, and the first words they pull out are humanist teachings. But what are we talking about with humanist teachings? This word has many different meanings, and it gets a little confusing. The term humanism is freely applied to a variety of beliefs, methods, and philosophies that place central emphasis on human beings. So you can't assume when someone says they follow humanist teachings, they're talking about the same philosophy or worldview. Let's look at the early usage of this term. Renaissance scholars that pushed for these studies, that way back when, they employed the term humanism to designate the Renaissance emphasis on classical studies and education. And of course, we still talk about the humanities. We don't usually refer to people that are teaching those things as humanists, but at one time, they were. The name itself was based on the Latin humanitas. That's where humanism came from. And that meant the development of human virtue in all its forms to the fullest extent. So basically, if you were going to develop all that, you were going to have a broad classical education. The fellow, let me come back here, you see him over here, Petrarch, he is often called the father of humanism. But this man was a very devout Catholic, very devout in his religion. So that's why I'm trying to share with you that this is used in different ways. And when we studied about Erasmus and others, many of the humanists that we call humanists and studied about at some point in time in our lives, most of us, were not what we're talking about when we come here in church together. So what in the world are we talking about? How did this term evolve to become something different that the people that wrote this source are referring to? Well, after being defrocked for his heretical views from the Reformed Church, Reverend Hans Dietrich was welcomed. He was thrown out of his church. So where, like many of us, then it might have been thrown out or encouraged to move on. He was welcomed into what was then known as the American Unitarian Association. This was back before the Unitarians and Universalists got together. They said, come on, we'll let you in. We love you. So he came into the American Unitarian Association, and he became pastor of the Unitarian Society in Spokane, Washington in 1911, and preached a lot of his ideas there. Now, while he was in Spokane, he found the term humanism used in an essay by Frederick Gould, not in ways associated with the Renaissance, but to mean belief and trust in human effort. Belief and trust in human effort. So Dietrich then started using that term in Spokane and when he moved on to other places. And he preached his ideas of humanism far and wide, and it became adopted by others. With Curtis W. Reese, another Unitarian minister, then they began to publish sermons, books, and essays on what they called religious humanism. Then in 1927, an organization called the Humanist Fellowship began meeting and gathering in Chicago. Chicago became sort of the incubator hotbed for humanism and humanist thought at that time. The first Humanist Manifesto was issued by a conference held at the University of Chicago in 1933. And the signers included my hero that I've preached on here a couple of times, John Dewey, and others that were in Chicago and other places. But the majority were ministers, chiefly Unitarian ministers and other theologians. Now, these were people who had adopted the philosophical ideas of Dietrich and Rees. And those ideas, if you go back and read their writings of those two ministers, those early Unitarian ministers, you will see much of that language that they wrote about repeated in the first Humanist Manifesto. They identified humanism as an ideology that espouses reason, ethics, and social and economic justice. And if you read that Humanist Manifesto, they refer to it as a religion. They're speaking of humanism as a religion. In 1941, there was a reorganization and incorporation of the Humanist Press Association, and they called that reorganization, that new conference, this was in 1941, the American Humanist Association. And those little H's that look like humans that I had on that first slide, that is what they use on a lot of their literature as their symbol, the American Humanist Association. In 1961, that's a big year for us, that was our wedding year, the Unitarians and Universalists merged, and they determined not to have any creed, since there were many humanists in both traditions, especially the Unitarians, but there were also Universalists that were humanists. And these humanists, many of them claimed, of course, that you could be good without God. So the UUA included that in their sources. They identified 5 sources that I went through quickly at the beginning of the sermon, and the 5th was humanist teachings. If you look in the back of your hymnal, as we have with others, you'll see there are readings from all of these sources, and many are from humanist teachings. And not are there only readings from humanist teachings, there are songs that are humanist teachings that we will enjoy singing, and that is Lean on Me. Robert is going to play a little introduction of that. Then I'm going to invite you to rise in body or spirit, and we're just going to sing one verse of Lean on Me. Another manifesto came in 1977. And again, many signers of this manifesto were Unitarian Universalists. And they signed the third one as well, the one that we read some excerpts from before the sermon. Among other clarifications and points in the second manifesto was this clarification, responding to the question that many people had regarding whether humanists are simply atheists. And this is what they said. Views that merely reject theism are not equivalent to humanism. They lack commitment to the positive belief in the possibilities of human progress and to the values central to it. Many within religious groups believing in the future of humanism now claim humanist credentials. See, within other religious groups. Humanism is an ethical process through which we all can move above and beyond divisive particulars, heroic personalities, dogmatic creeds, and ritual customs of past religions or their mere negation. An important clarification made for Humanist Manifesto 2. In fact, though, by the turn of the millennium, approximately half of our membership of Unitarian Universalists identified as humanists, or something kin to that. They may have called themselves agnostics or other words, but about half of them by that time were humanists. Now, sad to say, UUA has not done a similar survey in this new century. But the soft evidence, the anecdotal evidence, and the accumulation of shared stories is that because we now have more folks that come to us from other traditions, including earth-centered traditions and Buddhist traditions and other religious traditions, and not only from those traditions, but we have, once again, more people coming to us who may identify as Christian and theistic, but are once again feeling more at home with us here because we have a welcoming spirit. The percentage of those who identify as humanists may have lessened. I don't know that for sure, but we are very diverse, I know, in this congregation. Though still, they probably are a very significant number and probably a plurality, if not a majority. So, let's take something outside of the box, though. So we have humanist teachings. Our unpackers are reaching in, and they say that these teachings are those which counsel us to heed the guidance of reason and the results of science. This particular appreciation for reason and science is probably what led me to Unitarian Universalism. The things that I was being taught in my Baptist church just didn't make sense to me. It didn't add up to me. And much of it was not backed by what we call good science. It's amazing to me that there are churches still that are still teaching children and adults lots of false information just because it's written in some book. This is not true of us. So we pay attention. We pay attention when the great majority of scientists tell us that climate change is real and that we are contributing to it. So this part of this source was an easy part for many of us to lift up. The next part of unpacking, though, may take a little more explanation for us. They're reaching in the box, and this is what they pull out. They talk about reason and science like this. They say, and warn us against idolatries of the mind and spirit. These humanist teachings warn us, and that reason and science warn us of the idolatries of the mind and spirit. What are they talking about there? When we think of idolatries or idols, many of us think of maybe something like this. If you've been to my house and looked on that little table when you first walk in, you'll see this little thing right here. You know who this is? I know some of you know. You don't want to know because in case you're wrong. This is Shiva, okay? Now, Shiva, got Shiva in some little store. I like Shiva. Shiva is dancing in a circle of flames. This is a little Hindu god. Dancing in a circle of flames. He's lifting up his left leg, and he's balancing over a demon who symbols ignorance. I think the reason I like Shiva too is because my former life as a teacher and a teacher educator, I feel like he's stamping out ignorance. Just stamp out that ignorance. And I suppose another reason that I have Shiva there is I figure that any god who dances can't be all bad. Right? So I have Shiva up there, but that is not an idol for me. Shiva, it's just something I like to look at and think about sometimes, but I don't have a devotion to this, so much so that I don't consider other possibilities. And when we're talking about idolatries, when the UUs put that in their source of the mind and spirit, what they're talking about is having such extreme devotion to something. For some folks it may be something like this, but it's usually not for us. But extreme devotion, so much so that we're not open to other possibilities. And even we UUs have idolatries. We have extreme devotion to some truth we were enlightened to, or something, maybe it could be to some things related to our family even or something. But we have some extreme devotion sometimes that we are not willing to be open to other possibilities. I'm going to share an example with you that I had to deal with recently. This past week, I was fortunate, as I am 2 times a year as a Unitarian Universalist minister, to go up to the mountain in Highlands, North Carolina, a very beautiful place. And this is my 10th year in ministry, and every year, this is where they have that twice a year. We go to the mountain and enjoy that beautiful scenery and enjoy worshiping together, learning new things as ministers, being with one another. We have talked at times about perhaps meeting in other places, especially since it seems like our colleagues from Virginia who are part of our chapter, they have to come so far, and many of them don't make it. I'm able to go twice a year because it's just 5 hours up the road. A lot of them can't make it. But when it comes up, I say, Summa is the mountain. The mountain is Summa. It has become an idol for me. That I haven't been open to other possibilities. Well, this year, not only were they talking about people who have a hard time coming there, we actually have 175 ministers in our chapter. We had about 30 there this time. The most we usually have a bigger amount in the fall, would be about 75 or 80. And most of them that do not come are the folks that are further away from us. So not only was that brought up this time, but also the UUA has shared with us that they are considering a boycott of North Carolina. And you probably know why. I've always, when I've heard UUA was boycotting something because of some stand they wanted to take, I've always usually thought, yes, we should do this, we should take a stand. But when I read Annette's letter to me, asking me to get in touch with the North Carolina ministers that were there so they could get input from them, that we might boycott North Carolina, which would mean that we couldn't go to the mountain for Summa. I didn't like that at all. Now, I hope they work out something like they did with Arizona, and that the folks say, no, the people in North Carolina, especially the LGBTQ community says, yes, we do want you to come because you will witness and help us. That's what my hope is. But they may decide to boycott. So I had to do some soul searching and also think about those that can't come. And I made a commitment to my colleagues. Of course, my voice might not matter that much. My term as president is up. They have a new president. But anyway, I made a commitment to my colleagues that I would be more open to our organization occasionally meeting somewhere other than the mountain. And I realized what I have done is I have made an idol out of this. So we Unitarian Universalists do that. Think about it. You have idols? Do you have idols? What are some things that you may have made an idol of? You have such devotion to. Could be an idea, a belief. It could be a thing or a place. That you are not open to considering other possibilities. We UUs also need to think about that, because we need to let reason and science and good thinking and other folks help us be open. This is a good source we need to think about. I ask you to read it again with me. Humanist teachings which counsel us to heed the guidance of reason and the results of science, and warn us against the idolatries of the mind and spirit. Now, I usually like to close my sermons on something assured, but I'm not going to close this one that way, because one thing that is in that back of that hymnal under humanist teachings is how we should cherish our doubts, not our assuredness, but we should lift up our doubts. So I'd like for you to join with me in reading this, and I'll read the plain Jane words, and you can read the italics. Cherish your doubts, for doubt is the attendant of truth.
Doubt is the key to the door of knowledge. It is the servant of discovery.
A belief which may not be questioned binds us to error, for there is incompleteness and imperfection in every belief.
Doubt is the touchstone of truth. It is an acid which eats away the false.
Let no one fear for the truth, that doubt may consume it, for doubt is a testing of belief.
The truth stands boldly and unafraid. It is not shaken by the testing.
For truth, if it be truth, arises from each testing stronger, more secure.
Those that would silence doubt are filled with fear. Their houses are built on shifting sands.
But those who fear not doubt and know its use are founded on rock.
They shall walk in the light of growing knowledge. The work of their hands shall endure.
Therefore, let us not fear doubt, but let us rejoice in its help.
It is to the wise as a staff to the blind. Doubt is the attendant of truth.
Those are words from Robert T. Weston. May it be so.